Hi, BookTube, it's Amy, and I'm back again reading from the Anatomy of Bibliomania by Holbrook Jackson. We're on page 326 today, with a section titled Men Who Become Books, Biblianthropus, defined. If, as I have shown, pro captu lectoris habent, sua fata libelli, and our footnote pointing us to a translation, the reader's fancy makes the fate of the books. Books, as I have also shown, make the fate of their readers. It is a quid pro quo, give and take. A true bookman, I have sufficiently argued, is congenially disposed towards books. All books as books interest me. And they to him. He attracts books as the magnets steel. Books, says Harold Child, and I can support him out of mine own experience, began to collect around me, to stick to me, to heap themselves upon me. There is only a difference in degree between the big and the little collector, between the hoarder and the reader. If costly libraries grew around Herber in several of the capitals of Europe, smaller and less valuable collections marked the numerous migrations of Shelley. But no matter how buried or besieged, they know how to find the book they need. Even the confusion of Maglibechi's library at Florence did not hinder him finding any book he wanted. And Thomas Watts, the first superintendent of the British Museum reading room, never forgot a single book that passed through his hands and always remembered its exact place. Everyone acquainted with bookmen can bring supporting evidence without delving into past times or other lands. And I'm obliged to Professor Prothero for discovering to me the clairvoyance of Henry Bradshaw in all such matters. In almost every page of his memoir, he shows that not only had the Cambridge librarian an infallible instinct for the contents and the character of a book, but that he could find any book he required, either in his own library or elsewhere, at home or abroad, with the exact instinct for locality of a homing pigeon or a migratory bird. His insight was so exceptional, says Blades, that his predictions seemed to bring their own fulfillment. Like the owl with its prey, he could find books in the dark. Like the lodestone-fingered hero of the fairy tale, he could draw out the lost fragments of ancient manuscripts from their hiding places, in the covers of other volumes, or in neglected corners of old libraries, or the muniment rooms of churches. He astonished librarians by discovering from them books in their own collections which they were convinced were not there. As when, in 1864, he visited Burgess to examine a particular book in the library. The librarian declared that the book had been removed by the French at the beginning of the century. Bradshaw was not convinced. He persisted that the book had not been moved, and at last blurted out the letter, shelf, and number under which the book would be found, and there it was. He had no note. The class mark was in his memory, along with all other particulars about the book. For more stories to this end, read him. I have said enough to enable me now to suggest that bookmen belong to a special class of Homo sapiens, since they are not primarily reasoners, but possess the instincts provoked and developed by a passionate attachment. This bookman, Biblianthropus, is bookish by predisposition and bookish by habit, the one adding to the other until by cumulative effect a distinct type of man is produced. The persistent memorizing of the results of intensive book culture would be sufficient in itself to bring about this differentiation. For if instinct, as some maintain, be inherited memory, repetition of memorable experiences in a single lifetime, especially if they are pleasurable, produces the same effect in that life as it would produce in a succession of lives, if repeated over many generations. For in this reference, life is memory. The life of a creature is the memory of a creature, and are variations but the materialized remembrance of experiences. If, saith mine author, we did not remember different things, we should be absolutely like each other. Bookmen are like each other in ratio to their unlikeness to other men. So great the influence of bookish experiences that constant and resolute bookmen may, some of them, take upon themselves the character and in some degree the appearance of books, as things take the signature of thought. Some authorities go so far as to say they become books, or as those old-fashioned librarians recorded by Gerald Stanley Lee, so identified with their books, so wrought in with them, that they could not be unmixed, a conclusion confirmed by Eugene Field, who observed that old booksellers from long and close association came to resemble their wares not only in their looks, but in their talk. I could enlarge upon this theme by bringing evidence in support from the general behavior of civilized peoples, who are all more or less, as I have hinted before, book-fed, or in the wider sense, newspaper-fed, reflections of the printed word, the modern world being, not always admirably, something of a bibliocracy, whose classes are Peripatetics, Platonists, Nietzscheans, Savins, Darwinians, Wesleyans, Muggletonians, Freudians, Swedenborgians, Burgians, Mendelians, Johnsonians, etc., set severally in a democratic archipelago, sufficed by the propaganda of the periodical press. This, however, is beyond the frontiers of my theme, which is Bibliomania. Goodness, I'm having trouble with this word. Bibliomania in more concentrate form. It may be reasonably argued that other processes of nature operate in bringing about these phenomena, as transfiguration or metempsychosis, the translation of one into the other, book into man, man into book. But this is not clear. At the same time, some are of the opinion that it is so, as Jacob, who argues that if the transmigration of souls is not a chimera, inventée pour la consolation des aimés tendres, invented for the consolation of pious souls, the soul of an old bouquinist of his acquaintance would certainly pass after death into one of his books, if only to give life to le ver rongier, the gnawing worm which digs its own grave dans les feuilles solitaires d'un Saint Thomas ou d'un Cujas, in the solitary pages of St. Thomas or Cujas. That the souls of men pass into their books during life is more generally admitted. Lalonde's whole soul was in his library, our footnote pointing us to Dibdin's Bibliomania. Show me a man's book, or rather a man's books, plural, show me a man's books, and you show me the man himself, etc. Yet, if we have no clear testimony of metempsychosis, the case for change, both of body and mind, as a result of contact with books, is perceptibly ruled by that same law of metamorphosis, which holds throughout all the divisions of our world: astronomic, geologic, biologic, psychologic, sociologic, and the rest. We know that while a physically cohering aggregate like the human body is getting larger and taking on its general shape, each of its organs is doing the same. That while each organ is growing and becoming unlike others, there is going on a differentiation and integration of its component tissues and vessels, and that even the components of these components are severally increasing and passing into more definitely heterogeneous structures. Such changes are observable within the limits of a single life by reason of what we do, see, think, eat, etc., and by its effect on the things which surround us and the people we meet. It may therefore be reasonably or fairly reasoned that a particular change of personality may proceed from tender and continuous association with such potent companions as books. For as Erasmus held, he that violently in love lives not in his own body, but in the thing he loves. If either of these theories be rejected as insufficient in itself, it may be supported by that process of transmutation by digestion which has various well-known manifestations in the coloring and size of men and animals, and the customs of primitive peoples, nor is it unreasonable to suppose that as the inhabitants of the South Sea Islands and the wilds of Africa are able, by the projection of ideas, to give a mysterious vitality to inanimate objects, so a biblio-animism may be at work making books men, men books, and if on the other hand, as Milton believes, the writer of a poem must himself be a true poem, or as Victor Hugo held, the book is its writer, I perceive no reason to suppose that a bookman may not himself become a book, seeing that we become what we absorb. For, Samuel Butler says, matter which has once been assimilated by any identity or personality becomes, for all practical purposes, parts of the assimilating personality. Thus, as another authority affirms, each reader, while receiving from the writer, is in reality reabsorbing into his life, where it refreshes or poisons him, a residue of his own living, but melted into absorbable suppleness, combined and stirred into a new kind of efficacy by the choice of the writer. Which, if I follow mine author aright, is a particular interpretation of an idea widely distributed among primitive peoples, who, Lubbock gives out, believe that a person imbibes the characteristics of an animal which he eats. And he brings in support many curious instances. Here are a few for a taste, which I have taken from his work and other sources. The Maoits in India give the elephants tigers' livers to make them courageous, and the eyes of a brown horned owl to make them see well at night. The Malays of Singapore go farther, for they are convinced that the man who eats tiger acquires the sagacity as well as the courage of that animal. So also the natives of the Ivory Coast of Africa drink elephant's blood, which is supposed to endow them with the strength and courage required in hunting those animals. On the other hand, the Dayaks of Borneo allow their women and children to eat venison, but to the men it is forbidden, lest they become as faint-hearted as a deer. In ancient times, it was believed that women became fertile by eating frogs, because that animal laid so many eggs. The Caribs eat neither pig nor tortoise, lest their eyes become as small as theirs. The Dakotas eat dog to induce canine sagacity and courage. The Arabs attribute the passionate and revengeful character of their race to the eating of camel flesh. Siberians eat bear's flesh because it gives a zest for the chase and makes them fearless. The Kafirs have a universal faith in all such meats, for they make a powder of the dried flesh of various wild beasts, which they administer with the object of imparting to the men the qualities of several animals. Human flesh has its gourmets in several ages and places, and some of these anthropomorphi take it as an alternative or augmentive, as those Maoris who eat their most formidable enemies to become strong and indefatigable, and that Chinese servant of an English merchant at the time of the Taiping Rebellion who ate the heart of a rebel in order to become brave. In times past, this belief still persisted, even in Europe, and in a recent instance of cannibalism among the gypsies in Czechoslovakia, one of them gave out that it was preferable to serve the brain to children so they might become more intelligent, and another disclosed that women's flesh was preferred by young men who considered that it had a more delicate flavor and imagined that they thereby acquired enhanced powers of seduction. From Le Temps, so that is a 1927 French source that's being quoted for those horrific sounding stories that, there may or may not be any truth in them. But apart from such effects, human flesh eaters believe that this practice gives continuity to their kind, as it is plainly set forth in the words of a prisoner, cannibal among cannibals, cited by Montaigne. I have a song made by a prisoner, he saith, wherein is this clause, let them boldly come all together, and flock in multitudes to feed on him. For with him they shall feed upon their fathers and grandfathers, and heretofore have served his body for food and nourishment. These muscles, saith he, this flesh, these veins, are your own. Fond men as you are, you know not that the substance of your forefathers' limbs is just tied unto ours? Taste them well, for in them shall you find the relish of your own flesh. From Of the Cannibals, Essays by Secombe. Some people, saith mine author again, anciently kept the custom even of devouring their own fathers, holding this action not only for a testimony of piety and good affection, but in some sort reviving and regenerating them by their transmutation, made in their quick flesh by digestion and nourishment, quoting the Apology of Raymond Sebund. And I apologize if you're a bit squeamish. I didn't realize we were going to be diving into quotes about cannibalism. Nor is this belief in transformation confined to flesh eating. New Zealanders encouraged their children to swallow pebbles to make them hard and incapable of pity. Many remedies were selected on this principle, says Lubbock, until recent times. It is, he continues, from the same kind of idea that eyebright, because the flowers somewhat resemble an eye, was supposed to be good for ocular complaints. Absorption is not the only process of transubstantiation. Change by contact with environment is so well established, not only in character and function, but in form, feature, and expression, that I need not dilate upon it. Read more in Lamarck, Darwin, Huxley, Spencer, Butler, etc. Every portion of our body, says Sir W. Arbuthnot Lane, Chagurgan to ye set of odd volumes, alters very definitely with any mechanical variation in our surroundings by concentration upon one pose, which is telescoped into a portion of the lifetime of the individual. Our footnote there pointing us to the influence which our surroundings exert upon us. I've lost my spot. The lifetime of the individual, yes. And he illustrates this remark from the effects of certain poses of brewers, draymen, coal porters, and shoemakers, from which I may infer by the same process that constant association with books, reading, turning over pages, holding, moving them from one place to another, as a daily habit over many years, may dispose the form and features of the bookman to a definite complexion or character, an approximation to a book or a library, blending in the end naturally with them, which is supported by William Godwin, who confesses that he himself is a sort of intellectual chameleon, assuming the colors of the substances on which I rest. Footnote pointing us to the Inquirer. It is thus something more than whimsy that made Father Angelo Finardi discover in the letters of Magliabechi's name, when Latinized Antonius Magliabecus, the nearly perfect anagram is Unus Bibliotheca, or rather Bibliotheca Magna. He is in himself a great library. And also made J.J. Jusrand see in Dr. E.J. Fernville a living and talking library, more delightful and cheerful than the British Museum. Our footnote pointing us to F.J. Fernville, a personal record book by Monroe. Leigh Hunt finds it pleasant to reflect that all those great lovers of books in times past have themselves become books. What better metamorphosis, he asks, could Pythagoras have desired? How Ovid and Horace exulted in anticipation of theirs. In the shape of a book, so small yet so comprehensive, so slight yet so lasting, so insignificant yet so venerable, turns the mighty activity of Homer, the placid sage of Academius, the grandeur of Milton, the exuberance of Spencer, the pungent elegance of Pope, and the volatility of Prior. And if life is memory, and human life conscious memory, a book, more than any other work of man, is an epitome of remembrance. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past. Our footnote, of course, pointing us to Shakespeare's sonnets. A book thus considered becomes the one who wrote it, a living entity as Milton knew, and therefore capable as well, or rather capable as all living things, of reproducing itself. Samuel Butler went so far as to argue that the production of a book was involuntary, for just as a generation of a body is not the result of parental desire for reproduction, but the discontent of the germs with their surroundings inside those parents, and a desire on their part to have a separate maintenance, our footnote pointing us to notebooks, So literary creation is the desire of the book germ within the author for a separate existence. That is a way to describe reproduction. The discontent of the germs with their surroundings inside those parents, and a desire on their part to have a separate maintenance. Of his own book, he says, I never make them. They grow, they come to me and insist on being written, and on being such and such. He did not want to write Irwin. He wanted to paint pictures, but Irwin insisted on being written with so great a force that he could not resist. Our footnote pointing us to Butler's notebook again. So he would conclude that just as a hen is only an egg's way of making another egg, an author is no more than a book's way of producing another book. A book is thus alive. It gives out force. It has the mysterious power of effecting mutations. And if it be objected that these changes are not corporeal, few will deny that an unseen current moves powerfully through a real book, that this current is the man who wrote it, or, which is more to my purpose, the juice or essence of him. In this contention I find support in a writer of our own day who gives out that de rerum natria is charged with Lucretius, and we are frequently brought into so sharp a contact with him that it resembles an electric shock. To which effect I have said some things already, and I now add this comment from Anatole France for another return to the main, which will augment with evidence this hypothesis. Masterpieces are books of life, he says, and when we read them, we make them pass into ourselves. George Moore brings the evidence of his own experience to bear favorably upon this idea, for he frankly confesses a book is nothing to him unless it contribute to the exact diet his mind requires at that time. He receives, digests, and casts it away. I discarded my books when I had assimilated them as much of them as my system required, but forever afterwards something of them is incarnate within him. Our footnote pointing us to Confessions of a Young Man, 1909, and I just need a sip of tea here. I've got a nice orange ginger tea today. Charles Lamb argues that with long pouring, George Dyer is grown almost into a book. He saw him in the library at Oriel College, Oxford, busy as a moth over some rotten archive, standing beside the old shelves, as passive as a book, and longed to new-coat him in Russia and assign him his place where he might have mustered for a tall scapula. And Sidney Smith, as we know, saw Macaulay as a book in breeches. Even women sometimes are subject to a like metamorphosis, as the heroine of Wright's The Female Virtuous, 1693, who was dubbed by Sir Maurice Meanwell a walking university, a library of flesh. Books to bookmen are both food and cover. They live by the proxy of them become books in mind, if not in body. As that one recorded by Hazlitt who believed implicitly in genius, truth, virtue, liberty, because he found the names of these things in books. The legend of good women was to him no fiction. Life was like an illuminated missal, and all the people but so many figures in a camera obscura. He reads the world like a favorite volume, only to find beauties in it, or like an edition of some old work which he is preparing for the press, only to make emendations in it and correct the errors that have inadvertently slipped in. Their influence, power of suggestion, hath been widely noted. In fear of it, Montaigne abstained from books when writing essays. When I write, he confessed, I can well omit the company and spare the remembrance of books, for fear they interrupt my form. Good authors deject me too much. They quail his courage. He strove, therefore, to imitate the painter who, having bungler-like drawn some cocks, forbade his boys to suffer any live cocks to come into his shop. To give himself some lustre or grace, he had rather need of some Antinianids, the musician's invention. But in the end, books won. for he could hardly be without Plutarch. In him he found, as so many have before and since, a master of insinuation, of book power, to turn men his way. He is so universal and so full that upon all occasions, and whatsoever extravagant subject you have undertaken, he intrudeth himself into your work, and gently reacheth you a help-affording hand, fraught with rare embellishments and inexhaustible of precious riches. It spites him to note how much this excellent authority is so much exposed to the pillage of those which haunt him. But he himself is no better, no more immune, for no sooner does he so much as glance upon him, but he pulls some leg or wing from him. The sum of all this being that Montaigne, knowing himself of an apish and imitating condition, feared to be made into the book of others. For it was his wish, he confessed, that all the world may know me by my book, and my book by me. His wish was fulfilled, for who knows his essays knows him, who touches them touches him. The bookman is a tree, another authority gives out, Dudin's Lettres des Mélanges. The bookman is a tree, another authority gives out, on which have been grafted Homer, Virgil, Milton, Dante, Petrarch, hence singular flowers which are not natural any more than they are artificial. With Homer he has looked at the plain of Troy, and there lingers in his brain something of the light of the sky of Greece. It has taken something of the pensive beauty of Virgil as he wanders on the Aventine slopes. He sees the world like Milton through the grey mists of England, like Dante through the limpid burning sky of Italy. And out of it all, he makes for himself, as though he peered through multicolored glasses, a new color that is unique. From all these glasses through which his life passes to reach the world, there is formed a particular tint which determines his imagination. On that note, I close this volume and affirm that bookmen, men of letters, students, and all manner of passionate readers are a species apart, finding their sustenance in the printed word, as plants imbibe air and fishes animalculae. They do not look upon life with their own eyes, but through the eyes of books, as through an optical glass, magnifying, intensifying, distorting, or glorifying according as they fancy it. Or sometimes they eschew all common affairs and use books as kaleidoscopes to make for their own delight fantastic patterns which they use as substitutes for life. They become natives of a world of books, creatures of the printed word, and in the end cease to be men, as by a gradual metastasis they are resolved into bookmen, twice born, first of woman, as ever man, and then of books, and by reason of this unique and distinct from the rest. But that brings us to the end of that section and that part of the book, The Origins of a Species, Men Who Become Books. Some very compelling imagery in those last little bits. The bookman or the reader ourselves as a tree with many grafted branches, a branch for every book and author that we've read and that has influenced our approach to life, perhaps. And then the bookman or the reader, the bookwoman, as twice born once through natural birth and born a second time, I guess, when we discover our love of reading, when we first identify ourselves as book women, book men, book people. But that brings us to the end of that section and that part. The next part here is libraries and the care of books. With the next section, we'll be reading titled The Praise of Libraries. But we'll pop the bookmark in there for today. If you've made it this far in the video, 29 minutes in, I'm going to assume that you find this work very interesting and you find my voice not annoying and probably soothing in some way, shape, or form, but you're interested enough in hearing my voice that you may be interested in subscribing to the channel membership levels that I've just added. Just this afternoon, actually, I filled out the necessary forms and was approved and hit the live button. So I now have 2 levels of channel membership. The amounts are in Canadian dollars. I'm assuming you'll see it in whatever your local currency is that you're using YouTube in. But the lowest, the basic channel membership level, the Dusty Bibliophile, I think I've called it. The Dusty Bibliophile is going to give you early access to videos. And the Dusty Bibliophile Plus, there's going to be some videos up there occasionally that are exclusive to people of that membership level. But the important thing here is with the basic membership level, if you decide to do that, which I would greatly appreciate, if you decide to do that, you will get access to a new video series I've started looking at the column published in the Ottawa Citizen between December of 1930 and October of 1945, titled Our Own Peeps. And Our Own Peeps was greatly condensed and edited down and published in book form in 1947 by Ryerson Press. But that book form is missing a large amount of the columns that were published over that 15-year period. So what I'm doing is I'm diving into the Ottawa Citizen archives, pulling those out and reading them aloud here on my channel. And the first one is going up today for people who take the time and the dedication to become a member of my channel. But if you don't want to do that, then no worries. Those videos will become available eventually. I think I've got the first ones set to become live, the end of January. But that's all I've got to say for now. I've got channel memberships now, no pressure. Just thought I'd try it out and give myself a chance to dive into some additional content that may only interest people who would possibly make it to the 29-31 minute mark of a video like this. I know that my content is not exactly, algorithm hitting. It's very niche, but it's something that I enjoy, and I know there is at least a tiny population of people, fellow book lovers, fellow bibliophiles here on YouTube, who might appreciate that content as well. But of course, there is a subscription cost to access the archives at the Ottawa Citizen. It takes up a great deal of time, hence the addition of the channel memberships. With enough channel memberships, hopefully I can cover the basic costs for accessing that archive. And, it'll help me out a little bit too, because going into the new year, I am having some dental surgery done, and that's going to be quite expensive. My insurance through work is only going to cover a portion of it, so I'm going to be a little bit short on funds for my book hobby in the new year. So channel memberships, I would greatly appreciate that, because that will allow me to continue to dive into my bookish hobbies. But as I said, let's leave it there for today.